So this is going to be a quick walkthrough of the process of photosynthesis. So now that we've covered cell respiration, you'll see that photosynthesis and cell respiration are very closely related. So here's our equation for photosynthesis, and you'll see here in this equation that we have carbon dioxide and water coming in, and we're producing sugar and oxygen. Now sometimes this formula will also include on the left side somewhere sunlight. Sunlight is the energy to power this process. So sunlight is not matter, it's not made of elements, so that's why it's not always included. But sunlight is going to provide the energy because this is actually an endergonic reaction, a reaction that requires energy. You're building sugars, glucose, from simpler compounds, carbon dioxide and water. And you'll recognize that this is basically the opposite of cell respiration, which is why on our last test we had questions about that, about the relationship between them and how, like, if you had the mouse and the plant in the jar, how the mouse would make carbon dioxide, but the plant would make oxygen, and they could sort of survive together because of these products becoming the reactants for the other equation. Okay, so moving along. So light is the energy for this process. Now, glucose, which is the C6H12O6, which you should know from our previous chapter, can get converted into other things. For example, it could get converted into a disaccharide sucrose. It could get converted into starch, like in potatoes and rice and things like that. So glucose is sort of our original product of photosynthesis, but then it can get converted into more complex carbohydrates. All right, now a reminder that light, and you may have learned about this in middle school, is there's an entire electromagnetic spectrum of light. You can only see a very small portion of it, and that's what we call visible light. It's the light that your eyes can actually detect. Light actually travels in waves, and different wavelengths of light have different amounts of energy, and they actually look different colors as well. So visible light, again, is just the wavelengths that we can see. From least energy to most energy, Roy G. Biv, you may have learned this. This is like the colors of the rainbow. Red light actually has the least amount of energy. It has the longest wavelength. Violet has the most energy. And then right after violet comes ultraviolet, UV, which we can't see, but it actually contains more energy than violet. And then X-rays come after that, and then gamma rays. So you may remember learning about this. Now, here's my point. This whole electromagnetic spectrum, I did a little demo in class and showed you this, that not all light is equal, and that the energy in light can provide the power to do things. So, for example, I had the beads in class that I showed you, and those beads, I could hit them all day long with visible light. I could put them really close to a white light, I could put them under a red light, I could put them under a green light. It wouldn't matter how hot the light is, how bright the light is, but if I put my beads under ultraviolet light, they changed color. Why? Because the power, it had enough energy and the correct amount of energy to excite the electrons in the beads and actually cause a color change to appear. So it turns out plants can't use all light equally either. Plants are green because they actually reflect green light. So our eyes are seeing green light, are green, the plants as green, because green light's being reflected, which means if you actually grew a plant and put it under a green light, so you used a prism, because white light, like the sunlight, it's got all the colors combined, right? So if I put it under a prism and separate it into all of its colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, etc., and then I put plants under just green, those plants, it would be just like they were in the dark. They would die. They could not do photosynthesis. It's just like if I light up a room with infrared, you can't see infrared, so to you the room would look dark because your eyes can't use that particular wavelength of light in order for you to see. Well, plants can't use green in order to make their food. So what do plants use to make their food? Well, they have these special pigments. Those pigments are found in the chloroplast. Pigments are light-absorbing molecules, and they happen to be, there happen to be several of them, but the one that's most important is chlorophyll. And there's actually two chlorophylls, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. For our class, you don't need to know the difference between them. Just know that chlorophyll is the green pigment, and it's the most important one because it's the one that has the ability to capture the light's energy to run photosynthesis. Now, there's these other pigments carotene and xanthophyll, they are red and yellow, and you kind of see them in the fall, like when plants turn colors, but they're actually there all along. They're called accessory pigments. It says they widen the range of light absorbed, but actually one of the main things they do is they actually protect the plant from UV light, believe it or not. Just like UV light can damage your DNA, that's what causes skin cancer, UV light can damage plants too. And carotene and xanthophyll can actually absorb UV light and protect the plants from that. They cannot do photosynthesis in regular green plants. Only chlorophyll actually runs photosynthesis. So this is what's called an absorption spectrum, and everywhere you see peaks, these are the colors of light, or the wavelengths in nanometers of light that are best absorbed by each of these pigments. And you can see that chlorophyll A and B, the ones that are really important for photosynthesis, not so much carotenoids, they mainly absorb in this range over here, this violet to blue range, and then over here in this orange to red range. But notice what's sort of left out is this green to yellow range. So if you were to put a plant under one of these, it couldn't absorb that. It would actually reflect that light back, and you would not actually be able to see that plant do photosynthesis. So the internal structure of a chloroplast, which is our organelle for photosynthesis, is specifically designed to capture the energy of the light. It has these stacks called grana, and each little pancake-looking thing in the stack is called a thylakoid. And it turns out that the thylakoid membrane, the membranes of these little pancakes, this is where all the chlorophyll is. It's all organized into these special areas called photosystems, and those photosystems have electrons that have the ability to get very excited when they are hit by the correct wavelength of light. Now, between the thylakoids is a liquid. It's called the stroma. It turns out that the thylakoid membrane is where the light reactions are going to happen, which is the first steps in photosynthesis. And then the stroma is where the Calvin cycle, sometimes called the dark reactions or the light-independent reactions, are going to happen. So the two different parts of the chloroplast have two different jobs. So this is showing a plant cell, one chloroplast from a plant cell. And then within that chloroplast, see these pancakes? These are your thylakoids. Entire stacks of these are the grana. And then if I was to just focus in on one membrane of one thylakoid, it would actually look like this. And this is where I actually see, this is where the what are called photosystems are located in these, in this membrane of the thylakoid. And that's where the light reactions of photosynthesis are going to happen. The Calvin cycle is going to happen in this liquid area. So this is a three-dimensional picture, but if I was to kind of redraw it as a two-dimensional picture, kind of like this. So the light reactions are happening here in the thylakoid membranes of these pancakes. And then the Calvin cycle, or the dark reactions, or the light-independent reactions, the second step of photosynthesis is going to happen here in the stroma, this liquidy area between the stacks of pancakes. This is actually a chloroplast under an electron microscope. This is the thylakoids, these stacks of pancakes here. All right, and then this is a little quick walkthrough again. So there's two membranes, an outer and an inner membrane. Not really important. It's important for endosymbiotic theory and the idea that chloroplasts used to be bacteria on their own. We talked about that a long time ago. But the parts you need to know, granum, which is the stack of pancakes. Thylakoid, that membrane of the thylakoid is where all the chlorophyll is located. And then the stroma, which is going to be all this liquid area in between these stacks of pancakes here. So grana, thylakoid, stroma. Okay, so the chloroplast is where our photosynthesis is going to happen. It's going to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars like glucose, high energy sugars, and oxygen. Here is an overview of the whole thing. So in the light reactions, our first step, it does not actually, notice no carbon dioxide here. Water's going to come in. Oxygen's going to be released. So what's going to ultimately happen is the hydrogens are going to break off this water. Remember how at the end of cell respiration, you made water. Oxygen was actually waiting at the end of the electron transport chain to pick up the hydrogens and electrons and make water. This is the exact opposite. Water's going to be split, and there's also going to be an electron transport chain, But instead of the, in cell respiration, you might remember NADH got rid of its H and the H ended up in water. This is going to be something kind of like that. The light reactions are actually going to also make ATP, like cell respiration does. But they're going to make a different coenzyme called NADPH. So it starts off as NADP+, and it's going to pick up hydrogen, ultimately from this water, and it's going to become NADPH. Now why? What's the purpose? Well, the dark reactions, or remember, they don't usually call it that anymore, Calvin cycle or light-independent reactions are a more common name. They're going to take the carbon dioxides along with the H from the NADPH, which ultimately came from the water, and they are going to make the glucose. So glucose is going to actually be built in the Calvin cycle. So the light reactions capture the sun's energy, make ATP, and they're going to make this coenzyme NADPH from the hydrogen of water. And then the Calvin cycle is going to take CO2 and turn it into glucose. Now, again, that's not a balanced equation, but ultimately that's what's going to happen. This dark reaction does not happen in the dark. All of this happens only in the light because these products of the light reactions only last a few seconds. It's not like you can do the light reactions in the day and the dark reactions at night. Plants are doing the light reactions and the Calvin cycle at the same time. That's one of the reasons they don't use the word dark reactions anymore, because that almost implies the dark reactions happen at night, which they don't. So, light-dependent reactions, those are the part that actually needs the sunlight, needs light, needs water. Occurs in the thylakoid membranes. Remember, that's these pancakes, the membranes of these pancakes inside the chloroplast. It's going to make oxygen, because it's going to split water, and the oxygen is going to be released into the atmosphere. It's going to make ATP, which is energy. That's going to be the power to run the Calvin cycle. And it's going to make NADPH. Technically, it's making that from NADP+. So really, it's just picking up hydrogen from water. The light-independent reaction, or dark reaction, or Calvin cycle, it needs carbon dioxide, because this is where the sugar is actually going to get built, right? And sugar is going to come from, the C and the O are going to come from the carbon dioxide. It's going to, it needs NADPH, because that's where the hydrogens are going to come from. And then it needs ATP, because building sugar requires energy. So the energy started from the sun, went into ATP, and then in the Calvin cycle, or dark reactions, it's actually going to be used to build sugar. All right. Now, the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma. So that's, remember, that liquidy part here, in between these thylakoids. And this is going to actually make your sugar, your glucose, or other high-energy sugars. All right. So this overview also shows it. So light is necessary for the light-dependent reactions. Water is also necessary. Oxygen will be released. It's going to make ATP, which is going to be the power to run the light-independent reactions to build sugars. And it's also going to make this NADPH, and the hydrogen from that is going to become the hydrogen that hooks up with the carbon dioxide to make our glucose, carbohydrates, at the end. And then these things get recycled back, the NADP plus and the ADP. All right, so the light reactions specifically only happen if the correct wavelength of light hits a photosystem. Remember, a photosystem is a collection of electrons in the thylakoid membrane. The electrons get excited, they attach to an electron carrier, they leave. The electron carrier is called NADP. It's just something that can carry electrons. That's what electron carriers are. And it's picking up hydrogen and an electron, technically. And it's becoming NADPH. Water is going to get split. Why is water split? To replace the hydrogens that left, and oxygen is going to be released as a waste product. So this is the electrons getting excited by light. They leave. They go through an electron transport chain. You do not have to know all these details, but ultimately we're going to make NADPH, we're going to make ATP, and this is the splitting of water. And this looks a lot like the electron transport chain. Guess what actually makes ATP, by the way? ATP synthase, the same enzyme in cell respiration. So we'll pick up next time with the Calvin cycle.